1 year after the Great Silence began, Ambassador Lisa Martinez stood before the cameras once again, but this time she was not alone. Representatives from 17 different species stood beside her on the observation deck of the space station New Geneva, humanity's newest diplomatic facility. The flags of the Independent Worlds Alliance flew behind them as Lisa prepared to announce the birth of a new galactic civilization. Today marks the end of an old era and the beginning of a new one, Lisa said as her words were broadcast across the galaxy. The Galactic Council claimed to represent all species, but it only served the interests of a privileged few. It preached cooperation while practicing domination. It spoke of unity while enforcing division. Today we announce the formation of the Independent Worlds Alliance, based on the radical idea that all sentient beings deserve dignity, respect, and equal treatment. The alliance had grown from humanity's original withdrawal as species after species, abandoned the failing council to seek better alternatives. The Corellians joined after their homeworld was saved by human medical teams working through private channels. The Altarians signed up when human scientists shared the cure for their genetic disorder without demanding payment or political concessions. The Ethani, Vorthon, and Solani became founding members alongside humanity after Captain Nathan Hughes established first contact protocols based on mutual respect rather than conquest. Captain Jake Sullivan now commanded the Starship Freedom's Call, a joint human-alien crew that represented everything the old council had claimed was impossible. Jake's first officer was a Corellian tactical specialist, his chief engineer was an Ethani quantum mechanics expert, and his medical officer was an Altarian geneticist. The ship operated more efficiently than any pure species vessel in the galaxy, because its crew combined the best talents from multiple civilizations. The Alliance military forces under Jake's command had already proven their effectiveness in defending member worlds from Corvan Syndicate attacks. The mixed crews brought together human strategic thinking, Vorthan warrior skills, Ethani engineering expertise, and Solani philosophical wisdom to create tactical capabilities that no single species could match. Dr. Amy Carter led research teams. That included brilliant alien scientists who had defected from Council space to join the Alliance's open research programs. Amy's teams made breakthrough discoveries every week because they combined human creativity with alien knowledge in ways that the Council's rigid hierarchy had never allowed. The contrast with the Council's hoarding of scientific knowledge was intentional and powerful. The Alliance operated on principles of genuine equality, where every member species had an equal voice, regardless of their military power or economic influence. Decisions were made through consensus rather than domination, and resources were shared based on need rather than political connections. The system worked because it was based on voluntary cooperation between equals rather than forced submission to a ruling class. Meanwhile, the remnants of the old council struggled to maintain control over their shrinking territory. Councillor Zeth Kari had been forced to accept the reality that the hegemony's 1,000-year dominance was ending. 17 species had formally withdrawn from council membership to join the alliance. 8 more were negotiating their departure. The council that had once ruled hundreds of worlds now controlled fewer than 50. The economic situation in council space had stabilized somewhat after emergency measures were implemented, but the standard of living remained far below pre-silence levels. The technological innovations that had driven galactic progress for decades were now exclusively controlled by the Alliance. Council scientists could only maintain existing technology, not develop new advances. The final humiliation came when the Council attempted one last diplomatic overture. They offered humanity full membership in a reformed council with unprecedented privileges and guarantees of equal treatment. The offer included administrative control over entire sectors of space and unlimited access to council resources. President Helen Brooks received the council's proposal at her office in Geneva and took exactly 30 seconds to compose her response. Her reply was broadcast across the galaxy so that every species could hear humanity's final answer to the organization that had rejected them for so long. "You offer us a seat at a table we no longer need," Helen said with quiet dignity. "We have built our own table, and everyone is welcome to join us. Everyone except those who believe that some species are born to rule over others. The age of council dominance is over. The age of alliance cooperation has begun." The crisis that tested the alliance's principles came when the mysterious plague that Dr. Grace Thompson could have solved years earlier finally reached Earth itself. The disease had evolved during its unchecked spread through council space and had become even more deadly and contagious. Several council species expected humans to develop a cure for themselves while leaving the aliens to die. Dr. Grace Thompson led a massive alliance research effort that brought together the best medical minds from a dozen species to combat the plague. The team worked around the clock, using cutting-edge facilities on 3 different worlds to develop not just a treatment, but a permanent cure that would protect all species from future outbreaks. When the cure was ready, Grace faced a choice that would define the Alliance's moral character. She could distribute the medicine only to Alliance worlds and let Council populations suffer the consequences of their government's policies. Or she could provide the cure to everyone regardless of political affiliations, because saving lives was more important than political revenge. Grace chose to save everyone. Alliance medical ships delivered the cure to every world that needed it, including the Council homeworlds that had rejected humanity for so long. The medical teams asked for nothing in return except the right to help sick and dying beings who needed their aid. The gesture demonstrated that human principles remained unchanged even when tested by their former oppressors' suffering. The Alliance was not built on hatred or revenge, but on the belief that all sentient life had value regardless of the politics of their governments. 5 years after the Great Silence began, the galaxy had been completely transformed. The Independent Worlds Alliance controlled 3/4 of inhabited space through voluntary association rather than conquest. Former Council territories slowly emptied as worlds petitioned to join the Alliance and escape the economic stagnation and technological backwardness of the old system. Engineer Tony Adams now taught his advanced techniques to students from 30 different species at the Alliance Technical Institute on Kepler Prime. His hyperspace relay networks connected Alliance worlds with communication systems that were faster and more reliable than anything the Council had ever achieved. The knowledge that had once been hoarded by human experts was now shared freely with anyone willing to learn. The transformation was visible everywhere. Alliance worlds prospered as their economies grew through genuine cooperation and mutual benefit. Scientific research advanced at unprecedented rates as brilliant minds from different species worked together without artificial barriers. Military conflicts decreased as the Alliance's fair mediation resolved disputes before they could escalate into wars. The final scene took place on the human colony world of New Seattle, where former Councilor Zeth Kari had been granted refugee status after the hegemony government collapsed. Zeth Kari had spent his life believing that his species was naturally superior to all others and that galactic civilization required strong leadership from a ruling elite. Now he lived as a simple citizen in a human city where he watched children from a dozen different species play together in perfect harmony. They attended the same schools, shared the same playgrounds, and formed friendships that crossed every boundary of biology and culture that had once seemed insurmountable. A young human girl named Emma Davis offered Zethkari a flower she had, picked from the community garden that was maintained by volunteers from 8 different species. Emma's smile carried no trace of the suspicion or hostility that had poisoned relations between species for so long. She saw Zethkari not as a former enemy or a representative of an alien government, but simply as a person who might appreciate a beautiful flower. For the first time in his long life, Zethkari understood what the humans had been trying to teach the galaxy all along. True strength did not come from the ability to dominate others, but from the courage to treat all beings with dignity and respect. Real leadership meant serving others rather than ruling them. Genuine civilization was built on cooperation rather than conquest. The Alliance motto was spoken by children of every member species in schools across hundreds of worlds. The words that had once seemed like naive idealism had become the foundation of a new galactic order that was stronger and more prosperous than anything the old council had achieved. We are all equal under the stars. The Great Silence had ended not with humanity's return to the old system, but with the old system's replacement by something better. The galaxy had learned that the species they had dismissed as too primitive to deserve respect had actually been the most advanced civilization among them. Human advancement had never been measured in weapons, or 6 months after Protocol Zero began, the proud hegemony faced something it had never experienced in 1,000 years of galactic dominance: famine. The agricultural worlds that fed the hegemony's core systems depended on human-designed farming, equipment, and human-developed crop enhancement techniques. Without constant updates to the genetic modifications that made their crops resistant to disease and environmental changes, the harvests were failing across dozens of worlds. Counselor. Zethkari stood in his private chambers looking out at the capital city of the hegemony homeworld. Normally, the vast metropolis would be blazing with light and activity at this hour. Instead, large sections of the city were dark as power rationing became necessary to keep essential services running. The transportation systems that moved millions of citizens between the towering city blocks were operating at reduced capacity because the human-designed traffic control networks had failed. For the first time in his long career, Zethkari was forced to consider doing something that no hegemony leader had ever done before: asking for help. The Human Red Cross had provided humanitarian aid to disaster victims across the galaxy for over a century. They had responded to plagues, famines, natural disasters, and wars without regard for politics or species rivalries. Director Maya Rodriguez had built the organization into the most trusted relief agency in known space. Zethkari composed a careful message requesting medical supplies and food aid for the civilian populations suffering from the infrastructure failures. He sent the message through diplomatic channels and waited for a response that never came. Maya Rodriguez could have saved millions of hegemony civilians, but the Great Silence meant that her organization's hands were tied by the total communication embargo. The Council's desperation led them to attempt something that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. They decided to force human compliance through military action. A massive fleet of 800 warships from 12 different species assembled at the edge of the Sol system with orders to blockade Earth until humanity agreed to resume cooperation with Council authorities. Admiral Gary Collins commanded the Earth defense grid from his headquarters deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. Gary had spent 30 years preparing for the possibility that Earth might need to defend itself against hostile alien forces. His defensive networks included orbital weapons platforms, asteroid-based missile batteries, and a fleet of heavily armed patrol ships that used the latest human technology. The Council fleet approached Earth expecting to face primitive human defenses that could be easily overwhelmed by superior numbers. What they found instead was a demonstration of just how far human military technology had advanced during their isolation from galactic civilization. Gary's forces engaged the Council fleet using weapons and tactics that the aliens had never seen before. Human ships moved faster and struck harder than anything in the Council fleet. Their weapon systems were more accurate and more powerful than the aliens had thought possible. Their defensive shields absorbed attacks that should have destroyed them, while their own weapons sliced through Council defenses like they were made of paper. The battle lasted less than 6 hours. When it ended, the entire Council fleet was disabled and drifting helplessly in space. Not a single human ship had been destroyed, and casualties among the human forces numbered in the dozens rather than thousands. The Council fleet's survivors found themselves rescued by the same humans they had come to attack, as Gary's forces provided life support and medical aid to the defeated alien crews. The disabled Council ships were left drifting at the edge of the Sol system as a warning to any other species that might consider using force against humanity. The message was clear. Humans had not withdrawn from galactic civilization because they were weak. They had withdrawn because they were strong enough to survive and thrive without the Council's approval, desperate to understand human technology. Several Council species attempted to reverse engineer equipment left behind in abandoned human facilities. The Zephyrians sent their best scientists to examine the logistics computers that had managed their trade networks. The Altarians tried to analyze the medical equipment that Dr. Rebecca Stone had used to treat their genetic disorders. The Draxi attempted to copy the weapon systems that human peacekeepers had carried. Chief Engineer Brandon Walsh had anticipated these attempts and prepared for them years in advance. Every piece of human technology included multiple layers of security designed to prevent unauthorized access or copying. The alien scientists found that the equipment would not function without constant authentication from human operators. Attempts to bypass these security measures triggered automatic self-destruct sequences that completely destroyed the technology rather than allow it to be stolen. The Zephyrian scientists watched in horror as their computer systems exploded in showers of sparks when they tried to access the core programming. The Altarian medical equipment dissolved into metallic slag when they attempted to remove its protective casings. The Draxi weapons turned themselves into piles of useless components when their security systems detected tampering. The breakthrough in understanding came from an unexpected source. Kevin Miller was a young linguist who had been studying human communications patterns for his doctoral dissertation. Kevin had access to sophisticated monitoring equipment that could intercept and analyze electromagnetic transmissions across multiple frequency ranges. What Kevin discovered shocked the entire Council intelligence community. Humans had not just stopped talking to alien species. They had completely revolutionized their communication methods during their isolation. The transmissions that Kevin detected showed evidence of massive construction projects, technological advances, and social changes that suggested human civilization was not just surviving without the Council, but was advancing at an unprecedented rate. The most disturbing discovery was that humans appeared to be in communication with unknown alien species that were not part of the Council. These mysterious contacts were sharing advanced technologies with humanity that were far beyond anything the Council possessed. Intelligence analyst Rachel Stone worked with Kevin to decode what they could of these transmissions, and the results were terrifying. The unknown aliens appeared to be an ancient species that had withdrawn from galactic politics thousands of years ago after becoming disgusted with the violence and corruption of younger civilizations. They had been watching humanity's development with interest and were impressed by the principled stand humans had taken against Council injustice. These mysterious beings had decided to share their advanced knowledge with humanity as a reward for human moral courage. Rachel's analysis suggested that human technology was advancing at a rate that would soon make them the most powerful species in the galaxy. Their ships were already superior to anything the Council could build. Their weapons were more advanced than Council military forces could match. Their medical knowledge was surpassing anything Council scientists had achieved. And this advancement was accelerating as the ancient aliens shared more of their accumulated wisdom. The political implications were staggering. Council species that had dismissed humans as primitive barbarians were now facing the possibility that humanity would soon possess technology that could make them the dominant power in the galaxy. The species that had been denied equal representation was becoming powerful enough to dictate terms to their former oppressors. The final blow to Council authority came when several member species began following humanity's example. The Corellians announced their withdrawal from Council activities after their requests for aid during their plague outbreak were ignored. The Altarians suspended their participation in Council meetings after their civilian populations began dying from the genetic disorder that Dr. Rebecca Stone could have treated. 8 different species formally requested permission to open independent diplomatic relations with humanity. They had seen how efficiently and fairly humans dealt with other species, and wanted to establish direct partnerships without Council interference. The Council's response was to threaten these species with economic sanctions and military action if they attempted to contact humanity. This heavy-handed response only drove more species to question Council authority. The organization that had claimed to represent the interests of all galactic civilizations was now using threats and force to prevent its members from seeking better alternatives. 17 species began secret negotiations to establish their own alliance separate from Council control. Councillor Zethkari faced the complete breakdown of the system he had spent his life defending. The Council's authority was crumbling as member species lost faith in its leadership. The galaxy's economy was collapsing without human expertise to maintain it. Council military forces were proving inadequate to maintain order as conflicts exploded across dozens of systems. The species that the Council had dismissed as too primitive to deserve respect had become the key to galactic civilization's survival. But the humans were not coming back, and their silence was speaking louder than any words they had ever spoken. The Council had created the crisis through their own arrogance, and now they had to face the consequences of their actions. 3 months after the Great Silence began, the Zephyrian Prime Minister Zalthanos sat in his office watching his civilization collapse in real time. The economic reports scrolling across his screens painted a picture of complete systemic failure. The Zephyrian trade empire that had dominated galactic commerce for 800 years was dying because the humans had taken their logistics systems with them when they left. Zalthanos had tried everything to contact Ambassador Lisa Martinez through secret channels and backdoor communications, but every attempt met with the same result: silence. The humans were not refusing to talk to them. They were simply not there anymore. It was as if an entire species had decided that the rest of the galaxy no longer existed. The Zephyrian economy had depended on human-designed algorithms that managed the flow of goods between thousands of worlds. These programs calculated shipping routes, predicted market demands, and coordinated the movement of millions of cargo vessels across the galaxy. Human programmers had built these systems to be incredibly efficient, but also incredibly complex. Without constant updates and maintenance from their creators, the algorithms began making mistakes. Small errors multiplied into larger problems as the system tried to compensate for data it no longer received. Ships carrying food supplies were sent to worlds that did not need them, while planets facing starvation received shipments of luxury goods. Critical medicines were routed to the wrong destinations, while emergency supplies sat in warehouses on worlds that had no use for them. Within 6 weeks, the entire Zephyrian trade network collapsed. Billions of beings across the galaxy found themselves without food, medicine, or basic supplies. Worlds that had relied on interstellar trade for centuries suddenly faced the prospect of reverting to primitive subsistence economies. On Earth, engineer Chloe Davis worked in her laboratory developing revolutionary new technologies that could transform galactic civilization. Her breakthrough discoveries in quantum field manipulation opened possibilities for faster-than-light travel that did not require the massive energy expenditures of traditional hyperspace drives. Her new power generation systems could provide clean, unlimited energy to entire star systems. But Chloe's discoveries stayed locked away in human research facilities, while Council scientists struggled with problems that seemed impossible to solve. The Council's own research programs had stagnated for decades as they became dependent on human innovation to drive technological progress. Without access to human creativity and ingenuity, their scientific advancement ground to a halt. The military situation deteriorated rapidly when the Corvin Syndicate realized that Council forces had been weakened by the loss of their human advisors and peacekeepers. The Syndicate was a loose confederation of pirate fleets and mercenary armies that had been kept in check by the superior tactics and training of Council military forces. But those forces had been trained and led by human officers whose strategic brilliance was now absent. Commander Steve Parker had been the tactical genius behind the Council's most successful military campaigns. His innovative battle strategies and his ability to coordinate complex multi-species operations had made Council forces nearly invincible in combat. Without Steve's leadership, the Council military became a confused collection of individual species, armies that could not work together effectively. The Corvin Syndicate launched their largest offensive in 50 years, striking at 17 different systems simultaneously. Council forces responded with outdated tactics and poor coordination. Battles that should have been easy victories turned into devastating defeats as Council commanders made mistakes that Steve would never have allowed. 3 major worlds fell to Syndicate forces within a month. The planet Kepler-7, which had been considered impregnable due to its defensive networks, was conquered in less than a week when its defenders failed to properly coordinate their orbital platforms and ground-based weapons. The space station complex at Rigel Station was captured intact when Council forces retreated in confusion after their commanders gave contradictory orders. Captain Nathan Hughes commanded the exploration vessel Meridian as it made contact with 3 new species in the unexplored regions beyond Council space. The first contact protocols that Nathan followed were completely different from the traditional Council approach. Instead of demanding submission to Council authority and adherence to Council laws, Nathan offered friendship, trade partnerships, and mutual defense agreements. The Ithani were a peaceful species of natural engineers whose cities floated in the clouds of their gas giant homeworld. They had been watching galactic civilization for centuries, but had never made contact because they feared being conquered or exploited by more powerful species. Nathan's respectful approach and humanity's reputation for fairness convinced them to open diplomatic relations. The Vorthon were a warrior culture that valued honor and strength above all else. They had fought wars against Council exploration fleets for decades, driving off any attempt at contact through superior tactics and technology. But they respected humanity's military reputation and Nathan's straightforward negotiating style. Instead of demanding surrender, they offered alliance. The Solani were an ancient species of philosophers and scientists who had withdrawn from galactic politics millennia ago when they became disgusted with the corruption and violence of younger civilizations. They had been watching humanity's development with interest and were impressed by the principled stand humans had taken against the Council's injustice. All three species chose to establish relations with humanity rather than seek membership in the Council. They saw humans as a species that shared their values of fairness, innovation, and respect for others. The Council's reputation for arrogance and exploitation made them unattractive partners compared to humanity's offer of genuine equality. Meanwhile, Dr. Grace Thompson's absence from the Council's medical research programs led to catastrophic failures in disease control across the galaxy. Grace had been leading efforts to combat 17 different plagues and genetic disorders that threatened various alien species. Her innovative treatments had been keeping millions of beings alive, while her research teams worked toward permanent cures. Without Grace's expertise, the treatment programs began failing. The Xerion plague that had been contained for 5 years began spreading again as the medicine used to treat it lost its effectiveness. The genetic modification therapy that was saving young Altarians from a hereditary disease stopped working when the treatment protocols were not properly updated. 3 different species faced potential extinction as diseases that had been under control for years suddenly exploded across their populations. Council medical teams tried desperately to continue Grace's work, but they lacked both her knowledge and her innovative approach to biological research. They could follow her old procedures, but they could not adapt them to meet new challenges or develop new treatments when the diseases evolved. The most devastating failure came from civilian contractor Paul Bennett's absence from the Council's data networks. Paul had been maintaining critical infrastructure systems across dozens of worlds for over a decade. He had designed these systems to be efficient and reliable, but he had also made himself indispensable by handling all the complex maintenance and troubleshooting personally. With Paul gone, the systems began experiencing cascading failures that spread from world to world like a technological plague. Power generation facilities shut down when their control computers encountered errors that only Paul knew how to fix. Water treatment plants stopped working when their monitoring systems crashed. Traffic control networks collapsed when their scheduling programs failed to receive the constant updates that Paul had been providing. The planet Thessia lost all electrical power when its main generator facility's computer system crashed during a routine maintenance cycle. The world of New Carthage found itself without clean water when its treatment plants shut down after their monitoring equipment reported false contamination readings. The orbital city of Starhold began losing atmospheric pressure when its life support systems malfunctioned and no one knew how to repair them. Counselor Zeth Kari called yet another emergency session as reports of infrastructure failures continued to pour in from across Council space. The hegemony's own worlds were experiencing blackouts and system failures as the technological foundation of their civilization crumbled without human expertise to maintain it. "We are witnessing the collapse of galactic civilization," Zethkari announced to the assembled council members. "Our economies are failing, our military forces are being defeated, our medical systems are overwhelmed, and our basic infrastructure is breaking down. All because we drove away a single species that we considered inferior." The council chamber fell silent as the representatives realized the true scope of their mistake. They had not just lost a useful member species, they had lost the species that held their entire civilization together. The humans were not coming back, and the galaxy was learning to fear the sound of silence. President Helen Brooks stood before the United Earth Assembly as representatives from every human colony watched through live video feeds. The Great Hall was completely silent as she prepared to announce the most significant decision in human history. Behind her stood the flags of 43 human worlds, each one ready to follow Earth's lead into an uncertain future. "My fellow humans," Helen began, her voice steady and strong. "For 2 centuries we have tried to earn respect through accommodation and compromise. We have bent our principles, limited our growth, and accepted insults in the hope that patience would eventually win us the partnership we sought. Today we choose a different path. Today we choose to earn respect through absence." The assembly erupted in cheers, but Helen raised her hand for silence. "Effective immediately, all human contact with Council species ends. No trade, no communication, no cooperation of any kind. We will speak to them again when they are ready to treat us as equals. Until then, we have nothing to say to them." Across the galaxy, the Great Silence began. Every human diplomatic mission went dark. Every trade frequency fell silent. Every scientific collaboration ended without explanation. Even the emergency beacon networks that helped lost ships find their way home stopped responding to non-human signals. On the Council station, Councilor Zethkari tried to contact Ambassador Lisa Martinez for the 20th time in 2 days. The communication system showed that his message was being received, but no response came back. It was as if humanity had simply vanished from the galaxy. "This is temporary," Zethkari told the emergency council session. "Humans are emotional creatures who act without thinking. They will realize their mistake within a few weeks and come back begging for readmittance to civilized society." But the effects of the Great Silence spread faster than anyone had predicted. The first crisis hit the Outer Rim territories where engineer Tony Adams had been maintaining the hyperspace relay stations that allowed faster-than-light communication across vast distances. Tony had been working alone on those stations for 5 years because no other species understood the complex mathematics involved in keeping the relays stable. Without Tony's constant adjustments, the relays began to drift out of alignment. Within a week, 3 major communication networks failed completely. Entire sectors lost contact with the rest of the galaxy. Ships traveling through hyperspace found themselves cut off from navigation updates and began getting lost in the void between stars. The medical crisis came next. Dr. Rebecca Stone had been leading research teams on 17 different worlds, working to cure diseases that threatened to wipe out entire species. Her revolutionary treatments were keeping millions of aliens alive, but the treatments required constant refinement and adjustment. Without Rebecca's expertise, the medicines began losing their effectiveness. The Corellian plague that had been under control for 3 years suddenly began spreading again. The Altarian genetic disorder that Rebecca had been treating started, claiming new victims. 3 different species faced the possibility of extinction within months, as their own doctors proved unable to continue Rebecca's work. The most unexpected crisis came from young Alex Turner, a 20-year-old pilot who had been mapping dangerous regions of space as a hobby. Alex loved exploring uncharted areas and finding safe routes through gravitational anomalies and unstable wormholes. He had been sharing his maps with the Council's navigation networks for free because he enjoyed helping other pilots avoid dangerous areas. The Council had never realized how much they depended on Alex's work until he stopped doing it. Without his constantly updated charts showing safe passages through the galaxy's most dangerous regions, Council ships began disappearing at an alarming rate. Entire fleets vanished into gravitational traps that Alex would have warned them about. Trade routes that had been safe for decades suddenly became death traps as space-time anomalies shifted without warning. Marine General Marcus Blake oversaw the withdrawal of human peacekeeping forces from 14 different conflict zones. For decades, human soldiers had been serving as neutral peacekeepers in wars between alien species. Their reputation for fairness and their skill in combat made them trusted mediators who could enforce ceasefires that other species could not maintain. Without human peacekeepers, the conflicts exploded into full-scale wars. The Draxi-Kellian border dispute that had been frozen for 8 years erupted into bloody warfare. The resource conflict in the Tau sector escalated from minor skirmishes to orbital bombardments. 4 different systems descended into chaos as ancient hatreds flared up without human soldiers there to keep the peace. Engineer Chloe Davis worked in her laboratory on Earth, developing new technologies that could revolutionize space travel and energy production. Her quantum manipulation techniques had been improving Council technology for years, but she had always shared her discoveries freely through scientific journals. Now her research stayed on Earth while Council scientists struggled with problems that Chloe could solve in minutes. The transportation networks began failing as human-designed logistics systems stopped receiving updates and maintenance. Captain Steve Parker had been serving as a tactical advisor to 6 different species, helping them coordinate their military forces and plan defensive strategies. Without his brilliant strategic mind, their armies became confused and ineffective, unable to respond properly to threats. Captain Nathan Hughes commanded the exploration vessel Meridian as it traveled beyond the borders of Council space. Nathan's mission was to make contact with new species and bring them into the galactic community. But instead of reporting his discoveries to the Council, Nathan established direct relations between these new species and humanity. 3 newly contacted civilizations chose to ally with humans rather than join the Council after seeing how efficiently and fairly humans conducted their diplomatic missions. Meanwhile, Dr. Grace Thompson's absence from the Council's disease research programs led to catastrophic failures in their medical systems. Grace had been working on cures for 17 different plagues and genetic disorders that threatened various alien species. Without her expertise, the research programs collapsed and death rates began climbing across dozens of worlds. The most devastating blow came from civilian contractor Paul Bennett, who had been quietly maintaining the Council's primary data networks for over a decade. Paul had designed the software systems that ran everything from traffic control to financial markets across Council space. He had built these systems to be efficient and reliable, but he had also built them to depend on his personal oversight and maintenance. With Paul gone, the systems began failing in cascading breakdowns that spread from world to world. Power grids collapsed when their control systems crashed. Banking networks froze when their security protocols encountered errors that only Paul knew how to fix. Transportation systems stopped working when their scheduling software failed to receive updates that Paul had been providing manually for years. The council called another emergency session as reports of failures and disasters poured in from across their territory. Councillor Zethkari looked at the damage reports with growing horror. In just 3 months, the galaxy's most stable civilization was falling apart because one supposedly inferior species had decided to stop helping them. How did we become so dependent on humans without realizing it? Zethkari asked his advisors. They made themselves indispensable gradually, his intelligence chief replied. They always volunteered for the difficult jobs that other species avoided. They solved problems that we could not solve. They maintained systems that we did not understand. We accepted their help because it made our lives easier, but we never learned to do those jobs ourselves. The Great Silence continued, and the council began to understand that they had made a terrible mistake. They had driven away the very species that held their civilization together. But humanity was not coming back, and their silent treatment was becoming the loudest message the galaxy had ever heard. Ambassador Lisa Martinez stood in the observation deck of the human ship New Horizon and watched the massive space station that housed the Galaxy Council grow smaller in the distance. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. She was angry beyond words. For the third time in 3 years, the Council had said no to humanity's request for equal treatment. They called humans too violent and too young to deserve the same rights as other species. Captain Jake Sullivan walked up beside her and looked out at the stars. He had been watching the Council meeting through the security feeds and saw everything that happened. The council members had barely listened to Lisa's presentation before voting against humanity. Some of them were even laughing when they announced their decision. They gave 40 new worlds to the Vorton Empire today, Jake said quietly. The same species that enslaves entire planets and burns cities for fun. But we are too violent for them. Lisa nodded and felt her anger grow stronger. The Vorton were known across the galaxy for their cruelty and their endless wars. They had destroyed hundreds of worlds and killed billions of innocent people. Yet the Council rewarded them with new territory while keeping humans locked in. Just 17 star systems. Dr. Amy Carter entered the observation deck carrying a data pad filled with her research. She had spent years studying the different species in the galaxy and comparing their achievements to humanity's record. The results were clear, but the Council refused to look at them. I have the final numbers, Amy said, and handed the pad to Lisa. Humans have solved more galactic conflicts in the past 50 years than any other species. We have created more new technologies and saved more lives than the top 5 Council species combined. We have never started a war of conquest, and we have never enslaved another sentient being. Jake looked at the data and shook his head. Then why do they keep treating us like children who cannot be trusted? Amy pointed to another section of her research. Because they are afraid of us? Not because we are violent, but because we are better than them at almost everything. Our ships are faster. Our weapons are more accurate. Our medicine saves lives. They cannot save, and our diplomats solve problems they have been fighting about for centuries. Lisa felt a cold certainty settle in her mind. She had spent 20 years trying to earn respect from the Council through patience and cooperation. She had followed their rules, respected their traditions, and tried to prove that humans deserved to be treated as equals. Nothing had worked. The Council would never see humans as anything more than useful barbarians. Send a message to Admiral Rick Torres on Earth, Lisa told Jake. Tell him I recommend immediate withdrawal from all Council activities. Complete withdrawal, No more trade, no more cooperation, no more begging for scraps from their table. Jake raised his eyebrows. Lisa, that would mean cutting all ties with 200 species and abandoning colonies that depend on council trade routes. Those colonies will survive, Lisa said firmly. Humans always find a way to survive. What we cannot survive is another century of being treated like servants while pretending to be partners. The New Horizons communications officer received Lisa's message and transmitted it through the quantum relay network to Earth. Within hours, the message reached not just Admiral Torres but President Helen Brooks and the entire United Earth Assembly. The response came back faster than anyone expected. Earth approved Lisa's recommendation by a vote of 412 to 3. As the New Horizon traveled back toward human space, Frank Lee was already implementing the first phase of the withdrawal. Frank controlled the largest human trading company in the galaxy, and his ships carried goods between thousands of worlds. His company had contracts worth trillions of credits with council species. Frank canceled every single contract at the same time. The effect was immediate and shocking. 17 different species depended on human-made computer systems to run their economies. 23 worlds used human-designed medical equipment to keep their populations healthy. 41 star systems relied on human shipping companies to move food and supplies between their planets. Within 6 hours of Frank's announcement, the hegemony stock market crashed. The Zephyrian trade network stopped working when their human-programmed computers went offline. 3 council species declared states of emergency as their supply chains collapsed. On the council station, Councillor Zeth Kari of the hegemony watched the economic reports with growing alarm. The hegemony had been the dominant power in the galaxy for over 1,000 years. They had never imagined that the loss of one species could cause such immediate damage to their empire. "This is impossible," Zeth Kari said to his advisors. "Humans are a minor species with limited influence. How can their departure cause such widespread disruption?" His economic advisor brought up charts showing the extent of human involvement in the galactic economy. "Sir, it appears that humans have become essential to many basic functions across council space. Their companies handle 30% of all interstellar shipping. Their doctors staff the medical facilities on 60 worlds. Their engineers maintain critical infrastructure on over 100 planets." Zeth Kari felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Are you telling me that we have become dependent on a species we consider inferior?" "Yes, sir. The data is very clear. Humans provide services and expertise that other species either cannot match or have never bothered to learn. We assumed they needed us more than we needed them. The evidence suggests we were wrong." Meanwhile, on Earth, Admiral Torres was coordinating the largest logistical operation in human history. Every human citizen working in council space had to be brought home safely. Every human company had to withdraw its assets without triggering violent responses from angry aliens. Every piece of human technology had to be secured or destroyed to prevent it from being stolen. The operation took 72 hours to complete. When it was finished, no human remained in council space except for a few diplomats who stayed behind to deliver one final message. Ambassador Lisa Martinez appeared on every major news network in the galaxy to make humanity's position clear. She stood behind a podium wearing her formal diplomatic uniform and spoke in a calm voice that carried to every world in council space. For 200 years, humanity has sought partnership with the species of this galaxy. We have offered our knowledge, our skills, and our friendship to all who would accept them. We have followed council laws even when those laws were unjust. We have accepted limitations on our growth, even when those limitations served no purpose, except to keep us weak. She paused and looked directly into the camera. Today that ends. Humanity withdraws from all Council activities. We will no longer trade with Council species, cooperate with Council projects, or respect Council authority. You have made your opinion of humanity clear. Now we make ours clear. We do not need you. We never needed you. We tried to work with you because we believed in cooperation and mutual respect. Since you are incapable of either, we will find our own path forward. The message ended, and every human communication channel went silent. The galaxy's most innovative species had just disappeared from galactic civilization. The Council would soon learn the true cost of their arrogance and the real value of the species they had dismissed as too primitive to deserve respect. The breaking point had been reached, and there was no going back.